Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Friday Roundup episode of Steel Sharpens Steel. I'm Tom Cunningham.
And I am Chuck Hobbs.
And today, as always, we are going to be covering the important news and events that happened this week. Obviously, politics weighs heavy on everyone's mind as we enter into the home stretch of the political season, but we do have some other things to talk about. First up on our list today, Attorney General of the United States William Barr engaged in some serious shenanigans with two starkly inflammatory comments this week about the notion of protesters exercising their First Amendment rights, which he attempted to classify as sedition, even going so far as to recommend to his staff persons that they seek to pursue those heavy charges against peaceful protesters, and comparing stay-at-home orders and quarantine masking to slavery. He compared wearing a mask to chattel slavery. Chuck, you're shaking your head, so I know that you were ready to leap in on this. What is your opinion of the Attorney General and how many senators are regretting their confirmation votes in light of his extreme rightward surge in the last month or so of this administration?
I think that AG Barr is emblematic of what we have seen over the last 4 years in this administration. When Donald Trump first ran or announced that he was running in 2015, all through the 2016 campaign to Inauguration Day in January of 2017, he was pretty vocal that he would change the way Washington works. Now, we had no idea what that would look like, what that would entail. And so the entire drain the swamp chant that was often used at his rallies, almost part and parcel with lock her up. You couldn't have one without the other. We didn't know what drain the swamp actually would look like, draining the swamp being Washington, D.C. What we have come to learn now over 4 years is that what the Trump administration has done is it has changed the way many of his followers look at traditional institutions that have always been the hallmarks of democracy. Case in point, the media. The fourth estate has always been almost a second or third rail, so to speak, of the political experience. And yet from the beginning, what do we see? Donald Trump, fake news, calling CNN fake news, New York Times fake news, Washington Post fake news. Any left-leaning or mainstream media that was not necessarily nice to him was considered to be fake news. And we know from studying history that totalitarians have always known that you have to control the narrative first and foremost. So with that in mind, I have always found that troubling. I also find the entire protest, lock them up type language coming from Bill Barr and directives to federal prosecutors troubling as well. Because one of the, if you want to talk about fake news, one of the fakest points that has been pervaded over the last 5 or 6 months is painting with a broad brush, trying to suggest that the handful of violent protesters in any given city outnumber the peaceful protesters in those same cities. There were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans who have exercised their First Amendment right to assemble and petition their government for redress. The redress in this situation being Black Lives Matter and trying to seek to have law enforcement officers no longer killing unarmed citizens of any color. And yet the Trump administration has doubled down, both itself as well as with its sycophants in the right-wing media, trying to suggest that law and order is out of control and that the main issue in America that's going to destroy this country are the handful of people who are looting and burning, be it in Portland, be it in Kenosha, Wisconsin, or even up in Minnesota earlier this year after the death of George Floyd. So, yeah, I find that very damaging. And what I keep wondering, Tom, is what is this going to look like one of these days, be it in January or be it 4 Januaries from now? Donald Trump will no longer be the president. But the question is, will we still have a republic with the way all of these institutions are constantly being attacked with respect to their legitimacy at this point in time?
Well, and one of the things that I find most troubling about the language around law and order and the recklessness and the lawlessness that has happened in a handful of cases in a handful of cities, and not even particularly large cities. Portland is obviously a major city in Oregon, but I mean, you compare it to Los Angeles or Detroit, even, or, various venues across the country. What has been ignored is that so many of the persons responsible for inciting violence are affiliated with this Boogaloo group. They were militia folks. In Kenosha, the most severe violence was initiated by a 17-year-old who came in to support militias. And so it is not as though the real issue, the very first person arrested in the George Floyd um, arson protests, was a white man in blackface. And we've seen evidence of these militias and these Boogaloo guys, leaving piles of bricks on the street. They come in with their bulletproof vests and they're armed to the teeth, and they're just waiting for a situation to emerge that they can capitalize on and begin the problems. So it's not even a matter so much of the individuals who are protesting. Of course, some people do get caught up. I'm not trying to say that there haven't been instances of looting, because there have. But when you look at the statistics, 97% of the protests that have taken place in this country in the aftermath of George Floyd, and also with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, say their names, have been peaceful. The streets have been flooded with people, but in so many communities where Black Lives Matter murals have been painted on the streets, including Washington, D.C., you don't see chaos. There are, of course, anything that sells. If it's burning, then that sells. And so the media focuses on that, but you don't get the focus on these individual protests where it really just is people exercising their rights. And to put not too fine a point on it, it was the president who launched tear gas at peaceful protesters when he went to that Episcopal church to hold the Bible upside down. So the first shots, quote unquote, fired were not from peaceful protesters, but from our own government services. And in the aftermath of those decisions, you had some top brass in the military expressing their chagrin that the military was used against private citizens in so gross a manner. And I think that we do need to have a reconciliation in this country about how we are dealing with these issues, what we are going to do. And this lurch of bars to the far, far, far right. I mean, I have to say, I was not convinced he was a good choice, but neither was I convinced that he was going to be pulling stunts like this. And one has to wonder, with all of the scrutiny that Christopher Wray, the FBI director, has been facing, if Barr is thinking, well, look, I might as well not make the mistake that Beauregard Sessions made. I'm not going to make the mistake that John Kelly made. I'm not going to make the mistake of all of the fired NSA folks. I'm going to do what I can to hold on to my job. Well, hold on to it, Barr, because you've got about 45 days left before you are going to be seeking unemployment, I imagine. And so I guess this is the consequence of the bubble in which Trump lives. And everybody in his administration is hard set on making sure that he feels comfortable, even to the detriment of the entire country. Joe Biden did come out and say that the comparison to slavery that Barr made was sick in his own town hall. And I think the right wing and the Trump campaign in specific, was trying to make the case that Sleepy Joe, low energy Joe, he's mentally unfit. He's slipping into senility. And while he didn't exactly set the world on fire with his own 90-minute town hall, he certainly did not display those qualities. And given the way the president has been calling herd mentality as opposed to herd immunity, and of course the infamous person, woman, man, camera, TV, he's hardly in a position to dog out another septuagenarian about his own mental faculties when everything seems to be declining as far as he's concerned, up to and including his own niece, who is a psychologist, and several psychologists in the Unfit documentary who are pointing to specific personality disorders as well as mental decline. Moving on, we had Mr. Trump in a town hall, a socially distanced town hall. It was really a rather empty room, and he was facing some undecided voters, and they did not appear to be undecided about how harshly they were going to criticize him. Two people stand out in particular. We had Pastor Carl Day, who posed the question of, when was America great for the Black people? And he said in the ghettos of this country, but I mean, it's arguable. Before we even got to ghettos, there were a lot of challenges that Black people were facing in this country. What was your feeling about that town hall and how you felt Donald handled being confronted by those voters?
Donald Trump is not necessarily best situated for the town hall format. And what I mean that is, I have said, and we have debated for weeks now, that I think that when it comes down to the debates between Biden and Trump, I think that Trump being he will do better in that type of format than he will in a town hall where you have to confront real people and you have to be able to discuss issues and generally show some level of empathy toward the individuals. And I thought that when I listened to him speak to some of the questions that were asked last week, you can tell that he was well prepared and when I say well prepared, in terms of sticking to his talking point. So whenever the issue would necessarily trend towards something that was against him, because make no mistake, like we talked about before we came on air, this was no forum of people who have not decided. I think that was a misnomer by ABC. Everybody who was in there pretty much is the minds made up, and the people who were asking questions were not individuals who were on the fence. Those were anti-Trump. Those were not softballs for Trump, so to speak. Those were questions, and he stuck to his answers. Like he was not going to be able to show any empathy on any of the issues that people were asking him questions about. He's going to stick to law and order. He's going to stick to the concept of Obamacare is bad. We're going to replace it, even though there is no discernible replacement from either his administration or the Republican Party in either chamber. So he stuck to his talking points, and I think that it did not do him quite well. And more importantly, look at the numbers. I thought it was very interesting that this was the first post-convention opportunity for either candidate to be in the public eye, and the numbers were abysmal, truth be told. And even though the right-wing media has kind of tried to Watusi on past that, it's very telling in regards to what I think people's minds are pretty much made up. Nobody even wanted to tune in to listen to that and what have you. So that's kind of where I am on it.
You know, it does strike me. There were a couple of people who positioned themselves as lifelong Republicans, people who had voted for him in 2016, people who considered themselves conservatives. But the challenge is that he was not really, as you said, being empathetic to what they were seeking answers on. And one of the big takeaways that at least one of the people, and we're going to talk about Sister Alicia Black, who gave a very pointed question about pre-existing conditions. And she said that she was born with sarcoidosis. It's an incurable ailment. It must be managed with medication. She had achieved a point in her life when the disease had spread to her brain, which would have qualified her for a lifetime of disability. But rather than do that, she continued her education, got her master's, got her PhD, and is working as a professor. However, were pre-existing conditions to be eliminated from her health plan, she would be dead within 72 hours without her medication. And Trump tried to say, well, we're going to take care of pre-existing conditions. But what Stephanopoulos actually called him to the carpet on is that, no, you have tried to strip this out of the healthcare plan, and you did not destroy Obamacare. Obamacare is still the law of the land right now. And since either in the 8 years of the Republicans who were trying supposedly to craft a solution that will replace Obamacare, never materialized ever, not once. In the 73, 74 votes to repeal Obamacare, they never came up with a replacement. And then, of course, in Trump's own administration, you had a situation where He has not yet offered. It's almost another full 4 years of him. He hasn't put anything together. He said that we will do this. We will protect people. We love people and we want to protect them with pre-existing conditions, but he hasn't offered anything. And if Obamacare were to be struck down, there would be nothing constraining the insurance companies from doing exactly that. And so his evasive non-answers, to your point, not only did they not address the concerns of the persons that were asking them, they also literally pushed Black to say, I wasn't sure I was going to vote, but now I absolutely am going to vote, and I'm absolutely going to vote against Donald Trump. And so ratings aside, and of course that's something that he loves ratings. He could not have possibly been happy with the reports he got after the town hall. But what we're seeing is a person who is so centered on himself that he can't conceive that there's anything that anybody else could possibly expect from him because he feels he's doing everything right. And that's a big problem for him, as other people who are not committed in his solid 42% of diehard base, convincing the people outside of that base bubble, and with showings such as these, does not necessarily, as far as I'm concerned, bode particularly well for his electoral prospects. It's important for us to be aware. It is important for us to always keep pushing. There is no space for anybody to feel complacent. There's no space for anybody to feel apathetic this election cycle. But it is important for us to realize that, counter to the narrative of, well, I guess we just, with Kamala Harris, he's just going to win automatically. That is not true. And we can keep the pressure on and make sure that he is indeed turned out of office. Speaking of his administration, our next segment is about persons in his administration who have vocally and directly come out saying that they are not going to vote for the president. Obviously, there are any number of officials who have created books, who have been on speaking tours. Most recently, Michael Cohen, who was his closest confidant for many, many years, his handler, his fixer, who has now come out with a devastating book that is going to be released. And of course, Bob Woodward, the big news story of the last week or so with the revelations that he had. But we had Olivia Troy, who was from the Corona Task Force, who came out and said that he was not concerned at all about Americans, and so she had to vote for Biden, as well as Josh Venable, who worked with the execrable Betsy DeVos as her chief of staff, who has now also come out for Biden. What do you make of these, along with the laundry list of folks, Scaramucci, all these other folks who have fallen by the wayside, some would say disgruntled? What is your take on these administration officials who are coming out so forcefully against their former boss?
It's unusual. Like you, I have watched politics for a number of years, Tom, and I cannot think of any incumbent administration that has had this many or these many individuals who have come out so forcefully against the boss. It is unusual. But again, this has been an unusual administration. And one thing that is interesting about President Trump is that when people either leave his direct employ or leave his indirect employ, being that they are underlings in cabinet agencies or other executive agencies, he tends to burn bridges with people in a way that, like I just said, I've never seen before. There are folks who just simply have watched, they've listened. I mean, when you think about the Jim Mattises, when you think about the Rex Tillersons, in addition to the Scaramucci's and people.
10 days. 10 days on the job.
10 days on the job and got to go. You have to ask yourself, like our parents used to say back in the day, like when they would get a bad report from school, we couldn't go home with it's the teacher's fault. It's the teacher's fault. It's Johnny's fault. It's Craig's fault. After a certain point in time, Johnny, Craig, and the teacher are not all lying on Chucky if he's not doing what he's supposed to do. And so It would be my behind getting torn up, because it's like, you need to do better. And so I find it interesting, again, and there's a common narrative among a lot of these individuals who have become, as what Vice President Mike Pence called, disgruntled employees. He tried to dismiss it as, oh, these are just disgruntled employees. But the narrative here has been the same, which is that this is a president who follows his own instincts, will not listen to counsel from other people. And not only will he not listen to counsel from other people, but when people push back with something that's contrary to what it is that he wants to do or what it is he believes, they wind up being the Twitter fodder, for lack of a better phrase. So with that in mind, I'm not surprised by this. But again, this has been an unusual last 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think that one of the takeaways is obviously these are not names that are going to set the world afire, but they were highly placed. These aren't people who were third and fourth deputy undersecretary, assistant, administrative, whatevers. This is the chief of staff of the Secretary of Education and a person who was intimately involved with the Corona Task Force, working directly with Pence. And so it just adds to the long line of folks with the Lincoln Project who are consistently dropping these hard-hitting ads, these lights of the Republican intelligentsia, Steve Schmidt, et cetera, who are a part of this campaign, and they are passionate about keeping this president to a single term. And so, as you said, I don't remember Barack Obama's folks dropping books like this. I don't remember anybody coming out of the Obama administration talking about his massive failures and talking about how they just had that in good conscience they could no longer support him. It's just a byproduct, I think, of the personality of the person in the office. And I would be remiss without mentioning that yet another sexual assault allegation, this time coming from 1997, has dropped just this week as we're heading into the home stretch of the campaign. And so I want to give you a chance to respond and jump in, but let's just remember the work that lays ahead of us. Go ahead.
Amen. Just real briefly, but not just the Obama administration, because it'll be easy for people to say, okay, Tom's a Democrat, Chuck's a Democrat, they're going back to Obama. I don't remember this happening in W's administration. No matter how bad things got with the Great Recession and the world was seeming to come to an end, there weren't a bunch of people jumping ship and then holding press conferences and writing books about how much they hated W. So
that's again, right.
Unconventional times.
Yeah, it really is. And it remains to be seen whether or not this is going to move the needle sufficiently. But it is interesting to note that Biden's lead in Wisconsin is holding, so much so that Trump is desperately trying to make pushes into Pennsylvania, saying that Scranton Joe is ignoring Pennsylvania. Now, we know that's not going to be the case. He's definitely going to be back in the home state, but he's now making the rounds. He is unbunkered. And he seems to be very comfortable with being out and able to be about. He's making very forceful commentary and interviews about how the president is handling things. He is making very forceful comments about the blunders with the pandemic. He's making very forceful comments about every single revelation that drops about Trump and his handling. And interestingly enough, Trump's niece said that one of the things that Biden can do to get under Trump's skin during the debates is to refer to him as Donald. Not as Mr. President, not as Mr. Trump, but as Donald, and just keep referring to him in a familiar way. And she says that that's going to set his teeth on edge and get him off his game, which I'd be all too happy to watch. Next up, in a somewhat surprisingly swift piece of news on the justice front, Ben Crump, our friend from our days in Tallahassee, was out this week announcing that a settlement has been reached in the murder of Breonna Taylor, a $12 million settlement, which is quite a large sum for a case which was covered up and for which the officers have yet to be indicted. But it is a strong settlement. $12 million is not a small amount, and it doesn't look like Louisville or anybody else is trying to contest that. And so that is at least a piece of hope that we have. And I know that you posted about Ben. You posted a picture with Ben on your page this week. What's your take on Breonna Taylor and her family and the economic justice, at least, that they are poised to receive?
Well, I totally agree with you that $12 million is no paltry sum. I think that, having handled some of these matters when I was still, handling civil trial law and what have you, I can tell you that more often than not, most settlements in police brutality cases are under $100,000. I think people would be surprised to know that. So $12 million is actually quite a large settlement for a case like this. And yet, knowing that, I think all of us would agree that no amount of money will ever assuage the feelings that the Taylor family has, and knowing that their daughter and granddaughter and what have you is dead, and you can't replace that. One of the things and one of the reasons I wanted to post that the other day is you see so many times, Tom, whether it's Trump supporters on the right or even Biden supporters on the left, people are so brash in their lack of knowledge and ignorance these days. And from the left, there are so many people. I scroll up and down social media and you see folks saying, Ben Crump's a terrible lawyer. Ben Crump doesn't win any cases. I don't like Ben Crump. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you all don't know what it is that you're talking about. Ben is a civil lawyer. Ben,
right. People asking why he's not getting prosecutions and convictions.
He's not a prosecutor.
That's not his thing.
That's not his role, right? And so I wanted to definitely push back against those who are negative against Ben, because he expends a lot of energy, and he and his former law partner, Daryl Parks, have expended quite a bit of money over the years, making sure that these Trayvon Martin cases and Breonna Taylor cases and so many others get the attention that they need to get. And so with that, I thought that was important. But also I wanted to make sure that we explain that it is not over. A settlement is, like you just said, economic justice, but there still is a call for those officers to be arrested. That is not over. That is still very much in play. And we have to continue to apply the pressure on the powers that be in Kentucky for those officers to be held accountable. Tom, you're muted.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that what Ben has been able to do in terms of raising awareness, keeping the pressure on, being a part of those negotiations, being kind of a lightning rod for attention on this and the other cases with which he is aligned. And so we're very, very proud of what he has been able to do for the family. And we look forward to those convictions, and, well, at least indictments and hopefully the convictions, because honestly, people get fired when their drawers come up $2 short. This is $12 million. And with the $12 million settlement, you're saying we were wrong. And so it's very difficult to square the idea that you can say you were $12 million of wrong, but that these officers should not be indicted. And so fingers crossed, we are definitely hoping that we are going to see some sort of redress of the actual criminal injustice that was meted out on Breonna Taylor. Now, moving into our final segment, I did promise that we weren't just going to talk about politics. So we do have something that bridges the gap between politics and pop culture. And one of the things that we are going to be taking a look at is a documentary that is put forth by Stacey Abrams. And she has been a force in politics, not only in Georgia during her gubernatorial run, but in the aftermath of that very, very narrow loss. She has been a bright star for the progressive left and a person who has been leading the charge for voter engagement and voter rights. And she has a documentary that is rolling out today on Amazon Prime. Let's take a look at the trailer.
If the power of the right to vote was truly made available to everyone in America, it would change the future of this nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams!
When I started running for governor, we anticipated that voter suppression was going to be instrumental in Brian Kemp's campaign, and we were right.
We've been in line for 5 hours.
They said, you've already voted. Looks like several days ago. No, I would have remembered that.
Thousands of people were told no and didn't have the authority to demand better.
These lines are insane. We had precinct consolidation, non-training of local election officials.
I knew something had gone horribly wrong. The system that is supposed to protect our democracy didn't work the way it was supposed to.
States implement voter suppression laws all across the country.
Things like new voter ID laws, purging. You're knocked off the roll.
gerrymandering.
Changing the voting boundaries.
Ohio is a use it or lose it state.
In the United States, the right to vote is the only right you can lose simply for not using it.
Jim Crow 2.0. That's what we're saying. We've got a lot of work to do.
When we started as a country,
6% of people were eligible to vote. There are still forces that are determined to keep citizens from voting.
Unless we fight for the right to vote, our democracy is put at risk.
The fight over voting rights is ultimately about power.
The states have figured out how to stop African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, the young, and the poor from voting.
history is never a straight line. It's always a fight.
I will not concede because the erosion of our democracy is not right.
We try to make history.
The vote matters.
You belong. You have value.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I didn't know any better, I'd almost think that I was looking at a campaign ad for Stacey Abrams in 2024. That was an amazingly well put together piece. And of course, Liz Garbus is a very famous director, an acclaimed director. And so I know I'm looking forward to strapping in and watching this documentary tonight. I think a lot of people will be able to absorb this, perhaps have some watch parties. There are going to be Jack and Jill chapters and perhaps fraternity members and sorority members who are going to be doing screenings of this in order to excite and energize the base. You are a Stacey Abrams fan. What do you think she is bringing to the table, and how do you think this is going to help push us across the finish line?
Stacey is a brilliant woman. She was a year behind me at Spelman when I was at Morehouse. And so I knew her. I can't say that we were close friends, but I definitely knew her and have been very impressed at her career journey over the last few years. And I think that she is doing now what she was doing even 25, 26 years ago, which is being a very vocal leader. She has wonderful ideas. She has just such a commanding presence. And so I got chills there when I was watching that trailer. Right? Chills of being so proud of somebody that you know. I mean, it's always a trip when it's somebody that you know, and you're like, wow, this is so cool. And yet at the same time, I too saw what you are seeing, which is, while I am hopeful that the Biden-Harris ticket will win, should the Biden-Harris ticket not prevail in November, you would definitely have to consider Stacey Abrams as someone to keep an eye on in the 2024 race.
Yeah, she demonstrated a very charismatic command of language. She was forceful. She was convincing. She does have youth on her side. She is not facing any of the sorts of racial ambiguities that have dogged, at least initially, Kamala Harris as far as her shared background. And of course, the Spelman contingency is a very powerful force as well. That whole Spell house, as you well know, having just done a sequence with Spelman alumna and one of your fellow Morehouse men. So it is going to be interesting to see. I would love to see her as a part of this administration. And I'm claiming it. So it'll be interesting to see what it is that she is going to be doing as we cross the threshold into the next 4 years. And I definitely look forward to seeing more. And we may be reporting on All In our next week. One of the things that is equally compelling and 100% on the art side, although one that addresses racial injustice, it's art imitating life yet again, is this new trailer of a film that just dropped. I know I was very eagerly anticipating seeing it released in theaters before the pandemic shut everything down, but this is the Janelle Monáe feature, Antebellum.
There she is. Guess what? Daddy is going to get you dressed for school today.
We are descendants of the gods. This land was always ours. But we must never relent. We're nowhere and everywhere.
You're from Virginia, right? I can tell. You're special.
We are the future.
You're not like the others.
I'm coming!
Whoever you were before, that's over.
What are we doing? What is the plan?
We go tonight.
911, what is your emergency?
What is going on?
Wow. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
a
We
movie
definitely
that clearly owes a lot to Get Out. You could definitely, they probably hired the exact same trailer editor because from the violins to the font choice to the shot selection to the eeriness, it is clearly adjacent to Get Out. It looks like it's perhaps a spiritual sequel. You could very easily see how the folks from the Coagula have continued and created this other situation where they appear to be binding forces of change agents who are Black into a antebellum environment to remove them from the equation. I am very much looking forward to this. Ever since the first trailer that I saw, I was hooked. And so I'm very excited. This is a movie from the writer-director duo of Bush and Renz. They are a biracial couple, and they've been working together for a while. This is their directorial feature debut. And again, it was supposed to be released in theaters, but now they have released it on basically every single possible streaming platform. If you have Amazon, you're good. If you have Hulu, you're good. It's got YouTube Prime. It's everywhere. So I am heartily encouraging people to take a dip into this movie. They do say it is not slavery horror. So I know a lot of people have problems with depictions of Black folks in the slavery South milieu, but what they are saying is that is not what this is about. And so I'm definitely going to give it a chance. A few actors that I recognize, one of the the husband character is from Dear White People. And so I am definitely looking forward. You can see the similarities just of that white girl stalking Janelle, very much like the character in Get Out. And so it's something I'm going to be watching for sure. What are you doing this weekend, my brother? We are in the high holy days of the Jewish faith. What are you going to be doing? What are you looking at this weekend?
Pretty much just relaxing, trying to recharge the batteries because there's so much work that we have to do between now and November 3rd from a political standpoint, but also keeping spirits up. Like I just see where our boy Vaughn Wilson just wrote with the Y'all Rock. You know, it really means a lot to me when we get good comments back from people. Some of them are friends of ours. Some of them are people we don't know, but it means a lot to know that the 30 minutes, 40 minutes that we spend doing what we do means something to people. And so we're going to continue to give everybody the best that we have.
That is without a doubt true. We thank you once again for joining us on Steel Sharpens Steel. I am Tom Cunningham.
And I am Chuck Hobbs.
And we look forward to seeing you next week and every week thereafter as we continue to provide the commentary, news, and coverage from the unique perspective of Steel Sharpens Steel. Thank you.